In this video, I'll be painting the third and final stages of this pet portrait. Hi, I'm Marion Dutton. I'm the author of the Healing Art book and the founder of MazArt Studio. If you are enjoying these tutorials, don't forget to give me those all-important thumbs up and also hit that subscribe button if you haven't done already. And if you haven't been over to my website already, go and visit there because I've got lots of full-length online tutorials for you to enjoy. And add your comments down below as well. Let me know where you're watching these tutorials from, and also if there's anything you would like to see me paint just for you. So this is the third part of this greyhound pet portrait. The colours I'm using are exactly the same. I always lay my entire palette out, same 12 colours, and I will list those down below. And of course I'm using the MazArt flat brushes and the Zest-It Lean medium, just as I did in part 2. I'm also referring to my colour swatch. Again, for more details on this, you can see that in part 2. And of course, those full colour swatches are available in the little booklets that I have for sale on my website. They are a very, very good representation of the actual colour swatches that I use in the workshops. The portrait booklet has some real breakdowns on eye details. And of course the same with the little pet portrait booklet. These are very condensed little booklets, but they are jam-packed full of hints and tips. I'm covering the entire portrait in the oil painting medium. This is called oiling out. And then taking a paper towel and wiping away that excess. I am being very gentle at this stage. This allows me to work wet into wet and allows this third and final layer to adhere really nicely to the first and second colour layers. Referring to my colour swatches, I begin mixing my 3 base tones. This is burnt umber with some mauve or some violet, and this is going to be my mid-tone. And then the dark is going to be the same 2 colours, but I'm also going to add some black into that as well. And this is going to be for my the darker colours. And then for the highlights, I'm actually just adding a little bit of white to that middle tone, just to make sure that there's a difference between the dark colour and the mid-tone. And then I'm going to take the dark colour and add some white to that. So I've got those 3 basic tones. I'll hold that up against the photograph and to see if I've got a good lightness in terms of colour tone. This is where squinting will really help you sort of see if there is a difference. I'm really looking for that tonal balance. Now what you're going to see me doing is making a string of colours. So I'm taking a little bit of that purple and adding it to the highlight colour, and a little bit of white. But I'm not actually going straight in, I'm actually making a string of colour. And at the other side I'm adding a little bit of blue, so I've got that base tone, and one side it's a little bluer, and on the other side it's a little bit more of the purple tones. I'm doing that exactly the same with the mid-tone as well. So once again I'm starting with the eyes and a very thin glaze of burnt sienna. You can really see how much that adds richness to the eyes. I'm going now with a little bit of yellow ochre to add that reflective light, just to reinforce everything I did. You're not necessarily looking to cover everything, you're just enhancing what you did on stage 2. As I do one eye, I always repeat on the other. A little bit of white now for them final sparkles in the eye. And this is the reflective light. This is the light that's passing through. I'm darkening the edges now with a little touch of burnt umber. I'm reinforcing the shape of the iris. Into black now to strengthen the pupil. And now I'm going into a blue-grey mixture to strengthen the highlight at the top of the eye. Really focusing on the shape of that highlight. And finally, a little bit of white to really reinforce that sparkle. I'm also highlighting the whites of the eye as well. Here you'll see that I'm using the small detail brush on the chiseled edge, and I'm using the highlight mixture that I made earlier. And I'm starting to pull tiny little hair strokes, sort of light over dark. Again, I'm not looking to cover everything I did in stage 2, but I'm actually just putting a slightly lighter version over the top and pulling those tiny little hair strokes out. I'm also focusing on the shape of the eye as well, on the lid lines. Here you'll see me using that brush again on the chiseled edge and just creating those tiny little hair strokes. Focusing on the direction that the hair is growing. I'm now using a darker colour, so this is the dark tone that I've mixed, and I'm using exactly the same technique. I'm not looking to cover everything that I did before in stage 2. I'm merely putting darker hair-like strokes over the top. Now I'm placing dark over light. So this is the dark hair strokes within a dark shape. And as before, I get that mop out and I soften everything gently. Here I'm using a light fleshy colour made with burnt sienna and white, just to highlight some of the contours in the ears. And then I'm adding some shadows as well, and all I've done is add a little touch of the violet to the burnt sienna and white mixture, just to have some shadows into the contours of the ears. And as always, we soften with that mop. Here I've gone into the very dark mixture, And I'm really starting to look at the darks within those ears. Really paying attention to the shape of the ears. As I do one ear, I will do the other exactly the same. Again, they're really dark underneath, so I'm really glazing that darker colour on there. If you remember on part 2 we softened all the edges, so what I'm actually doing now is bringing some of those edges into sharp relief against that background. Again, I'm using very tiny little hair strokes and pulling little feather strokes out into the background now, so it's not so neat and tidy. I've gone into the highlight colour now and I'm reinforcing the highlight right on the tip of those ears. Again, little tiny hair strokes, following the direction of the hair growth. So now I'm working on the collar. I'm adding alizarin crimson with a little bit of the violet for a shadow colour, and I'm reinforcing the shadows. Then I'm using cadmium red for some of the highlights. And right on the edge there I've got cadmium red with some cadmium orange and a little touch of white just for those final highlights on the edge of that collar. For the silverware on the collar, I'm using a blue-grey for some of the shadows, just to reinforce a few of those shadows. And then finally switching to titanium white to really focus on the sparkle and the shine on this metal. So now I'm working down the face with the darker shadow tones that we mixed earlier, focusing on the shape and pulling tiny little hair strokes out into that background. So I'm really trying to establish the jawline. Again, you'll see me using these tiny little hair-like strokes, using the chiseled edge of that brush. I'm switching to the highlight colour now and pulling a few little hair strokes out over the collar. Moving on to the chest area now. I'm first going into the dark mixture. Again, working carefully around that collar and pulling the tiny little hair strokes out into the background. So you'll see I'm using that brush right on the chiseled edge. Again, not looking to cover everything we did in stage 2. This is a dark over the top of what was already there. That brush right on that chiseled edge and tiny little strokes, being very, very careful to follow the direction that the hair is growing. And you can see that underpainting, that blocking in stages is just peeking through. I'm switching now to the lighter tone, to the highlight mixture, and doing exactly the same. Leaving that blocking in stages peeking through. Going back into that dark now to really strengthen the darker shades. You're really looking for your contrasts in this final stages, your darkest darks and your lightest lights. I'm using titanium white now to continue the same hair light stroke on the blaze on his chest. And I'm using a little bit of dark now to just reshape that blaze on the chest to make sure it's accurate with the photograph. And as always, finishing everything with the mop. Keeping everything nice and soft. Here I'm working on the nose, again just reinforcing everything we did, focusing on those darks and the lights, really looking for that contrast now. And of course at this point I'm always making sure that the shapes of everything is as accurate as possible. Reinforcing the nostril with a very strong dark. And popping on a highlight as well. I'm now really focused on the highlight on the nose, and I'm using a little tap down stroke. Here I can see a little bit of blue on the nose, so I'm putting a blue grey on there and then tapping on some white highlights. I'm using the Dome Blender now to really tap that in and create the texture on the nose. Working on the muzzle now. First of all, I focus on the shape, making sure that that's accurate. And then here you'll see I'm using the brush on the side, on that chiseled edge, and just trying to get some of those tiny little hair strokes and break up that solid line, just so it looks more natural. Now I'm going into a darker tone here. I'm beginning to just pull out some of the darks that I can see around the muzzle area. So I first put the darks in there, and then I'm switching to titanium white to really begin to put some of the lighter little hair strokes that I can see in there. It's really important at this stage that you pay attention to the direction that the hair is growing. As always, I get that mop out and I just soften those edges, just so it really sinks into the face and doesn't just look like it's been plonked on there. I'll also use that dome blender as well, just to blend the edges of the hair into the face. So here you'll see now I'm working over the whole portrait, and I'm switching between the highlight colours and the medium tones and the shadows as I see them. Working down the muzzle, and again these tiny little hair strokes following that direction. I'm using a little bit of a highlight there right on the edge of the muzzle, just so that it stands away from the back. Again, you'll see I'm using the very tiny little hair strokes. This is on the eyebrow area to make those eyebrows stand out. Here you'll see I'm making small hair strokes going into the ears, and if you look carefully you'll see I'm using the bluish highlight tone that we made earlier when I did those initial string of colours. I can see a little bit of the reflective sky on the top of the head, so I'm using that bluish highlight. Back to these tiny little hair strokes now, crossing light over dark and dark over light. I will mention at this point that stage 3 can be repeated as often as you like. And what you will need to do is just let the portrait dry and then oil out as we did at the beginning, so that each subsequent layer adheres nicely to the next. This will really allow you to add many layers of richness to the portrait until you've got something you're completely happy with. You'll see me using the dome blender with that back and forth stroke, And of course, as always, finishing everything off nice and neatly with the mop, brushing the direction that the hair is growing. The final stages of the portrait, I'm really looking now at the darks and the lights, really looking for that contrast. Going over the whole portrait now, reinforcing a few of the darker areas. And of course, always finishing with that mop to keep everything nice and soft. I've switched to a rigger now, and we're adding the whiskers on, and there's a few tiny little hair strokes. I'm using white that's been toned down with a little bit of grey. And I've thinned the paint with just a little bit of medium, just so it flows easily off the brush. So here is the final painting. I hope you've really enjoyed this 3-part tutorial, and if you haven't done already, please consider subscribing to the channel, and again remembering to give me those all important thumbs up. Thank you very much for watching.